Last week when we began our sermon series based on the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew was very pointed to tell us a prequel. He said that Jesus had been traveling around Galilee speaking in their synagogues and their marketplaces. He had healed the sick and cast out demons. And we know that a lot of times that when they talked about casting out demons, it was about illnesses that they didn't know anything about. But the point for Matthew was that Jesus had drawn a huge crowd of people from all walks of life, both Jewish and Gentile. And so when Jesus gets to the mountain, he sits down to teach his 4 disciples that he had called so far, and while the rest of the crowd was eavesdropping, just like we get to, he began with the Beatitudes. He said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit." Blessed can mean happy or fortunate or something that's praiseworthy. He said, "Blessed are those who mourn," and he meant those who are sympathetic with those who are in mourning or have gone through difficult times. When he talked about happy are those who are poor in spirit, he was talking about people who were humble and realized that their full dependence was upon God. And there's a whole list of these Beatitudes, and over time theologians have tried to figure out what they mean or whether they're current conditions with future promises after Christ comes again, or whether they had something more to do with wisdom sayings that Jesus was spewing out there, hoping people would think them through. But what most scholarship tells us now is that these were present-day issues with present-day outcomes. Because what Jesus was talking about was not some pie-in-the-sky things we should aspire to. He was talking about our actual identity when we call ourselves believers in Jesus or people of faith. But when we get to that last beatitude, it seems kind of odd to me. And I'm going to paraphrase, but Jesus basically said, blessed, happy, fortunate, or praiseworthy are those who are persecuted and reviled for his sake. Now the reason that's odd because Jesus was speaking to a group of people who were extremely downtrodden. They lived hand to mouth. They lived day to day, paycheck to paycheck like many of us. They were oppressed by an oppressive and mean, almost, Roman government. Anything you did to break the peace of Rome was come down on very hard. They had no political agency. They didn't have any power. They were betrayed by their occupiers, the Roman Empire, and they had been betrayed by their religious leaders who were in cahoots with Rome in order to maintain their power and to maintain their income stream. So thinking about all this in the context of that last beatitude, we have to ask ourselves how the people who heard this would have heard that beatitude, or what comes next. Because I don't know, if I was back then, I would have wanted Jesus to say something like this, and I probably would have expected him to say something like this. You know what? You're persecuted and you're downtrodden, and people revile you and rebuke you for my sake. So just lay low. Don't make waves. Just get along and go along. Do whatever you have to do to stay below the radar, to get through life and not suffer any more persecution or any more difficulty in your life. But Jesus didn't say that. After he told us what our identity was, then he told us that we needed to be light and salt in the world. And it wasn't if you want to, it wasn't in the future, it's not someday if you get around to it. In the Greek, the you are is present tense. It's a given that you are the salt of the earth and light to the world. Irregardless of the persecution, irregardless of what it is you're up against, irregardless of the oppression of Rome, or the or the way that your religious leaders have betrayed your faith tradition in you. Be light and be salt. What Jesus basically was saying is that we're to be an influence in the world we live in, we're to be a positive influence, but it begs the question, what kind of influence are we called to be? As you all know, that in the 70s and the 80s, a group of Christians got together and created the Moral Majority, whose purpose was to build a voting bloc in order to change the nature of our politics. That's one way to do it. There are political action committees that gather money and raise money in order to put their values into the political system and elect or try to elect people who will do so, or to get out of office people who won't. But I don't think that's what Jesus was talking about. I think he was, and the reason I say that is because the end of salt and earth, he says, so that people will see your good works and know me, meaning God. In the early church, they created, as influence, communities of caring where they made sure that everybody's needs were cared for. In the early church, they bought the freedom of slaves. They harbored them and helped them reestablish their lives. They began to elevate the status of women from property to equal partners. Later in the life of the church, when Rome allowed their upper echelon or their aristocracy to put children on Gehenna, the trash that was burning outside of the city, out there to die of exposure if they had an unwanted child, the Christians would go and rescue them, heal them, and raise them as if they were their own children. During the Reformation and the plagues, when a lot of people were fleeing to the countryside because they thought the air was cleaner and they wanted to escape the plague and escape death, the Christians, they stayed behind, and they did two things. They made sure that those who were sick were cared for and if possibly healed, but had presence with them until the day they died. And rather than heaping their bodies on wagons and burning them, they made sure they got a decent Christian burial. I think this is what Jesus meant by influence. It was, we're to go out into the world, and by example and by our deeds, we're to show good works. And it happens all around us. We have people that are fighting for equality and against injustice. We have people fighting against racism, classism, and sexism. We have people drilling wells in developing countries where people don't have clean water to drink. And because of this, they see God. And that is the point of being salt and light. Not so we can force our will on society, not so we can make demands on society, but through our actions and our compassion and our love, we can show people what it means to be a part of a faith tradition. And I believe that's what Jesus meant by being salt and being light. It's not an option. It includes all of us. And just imagine what kind of world we would have if all Christians around the world would come together and be salt and light. In fact, today we're celebrating World Communion Sunday because just like many other Christians around the world, we take communion. We remember the works that God has done for us through Christ. And it's incumbent upon us to go out and share those works, to share that love, to share that compassion after we've partaked of Holy Communion. And that's the end of today's lesson.